So joining us right now is State Senator Will Haskell, who was elected in November 2018 to represent the 26th State Senate District for Connecticut. Born in 1996, he is the youngest member of the General Assembly. And Will has an incredibly amazing background, but after graduating from Georgetown, Senator Haskell returned to his hometown. He decided to run for office with the mission of drawing other recent graduates back to Connecticut. As the Senate chairman of Higher Education and Employment Advancement Committee, Senator Haskell is laser focused on providing businesses with the 21st century workforce they need in order to thrive in Connecticut. Of course, that's what we're all about here at Power to Fly too. With an eye towards Connecticut's future, Senator Haskell is determined to help build a state that is affordable and appealing to every generation. And joining him in conversation will be Hale McSharry, an organizer, activist, and theater artist based in Brooklyn. And I'm a former theater artist based in Brooklyn myself. So hi, Hale. Hale, coming from Northwestern University, a former Greenwich Representative Town Meeting member, proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America, and a current member of the New York Working Families Party. So here to discuss Senator Haskell's new book, 100,000 First Bosses, are Senator Haskell and Hale. So I'll turn things over to you both. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. Senator Will Haskell, it is really amazing to see you again. It's really great to have this conversation with you. I'm really happy to call you a friend and an inspiration of mine. And it's really great to see you. Thank you for coming today. Can I hear you? Can I hear you?
My bad. You'd think after all this time on Zoom, I'd have found the mute button. No, Hale, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. And Rob, thanks for the incredibly kind introduction. I'm so honored to be joining Power to Fly and sharing a little bit about my journey. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And, Senator, it seems like a really exciting and interesting time in your life. Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself? Where are you based, and what is your origin story? How did you get here?
Sure. So my name is Will Haskell, as you heard. I live in southwestern Connecticut. If you have never been to the state of Connecticut, maybe you know what it looks like. It's kind of a rectangle with a little thing sticking out on the bottom left. And I grew up in that little thing that sticks out there. It's Fairfield County. It's just an hour outside of New York. And I'd always been sort of interested in politics. Like all of us, was sort of preoccupied by what was happening in Washington, D.C. I actually decided to go to school in Washington, D.C. because I was so sort of intrigued by the work of Congress. And then, like a lot of people, I woke up the morning after President Trump's election and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I'd grown up in the era of sort of what I think of as progressive complacency of the Obama era, where we fought bitterly over how quickly we were moving in a certain direction, but at least it seemed that progress was assured, that we were moving forward. And then all of a sudden, there was this president who was promising in very explicit terms to move us backwards, to make America great again. So for the first time, the theme of the book that I wrote is honesty, and I want to be very honest with all of you today. For the first time in my life, I decided to look at who was representing me at the state and local level, to dig into who was speaking on my behalf at town hall and in the state government. Because if the federal government was going in one direction that I didn't agree with, it was clear that the state and local government were going to be the first line of defense. Anyways, I'll make a very long story short and say that I found out that my state senator was somebody who I really vehemently disagreed with on a whole host of issues, from paid family and medical leave to gun violence prevention to climate change. And even worse than that, I found out that nobody was running against her. And that's actually sort of common in down ballot races. Very often incumbents are forced or go unchallenged. And whether you agree with me or disagree with me on politics, if you don't support anything else I say today, maybe you'll at least agree that incumbents should be held accountable. We should hold people's feet to the fire from both parties in every re-election campaign. They should be forced to go door to door and talk to the people for whom they work, explain their voting record and defend it. I didn't think I had a chance of winning, but I thought it was important for our democracy to undergo that process. So I hired my college roommate to be my campaign manager, and I moved back to my hometown, and I started knocking on doors the day after graduation.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it was such a crazy time. This was 2018, right? When you ran for state senate for the first time, and your District 26, that seat had been held by Republicans in the state senate for more than 40 years until you won at the age of 22. And you said you didn't think you had a chance of winning. What was your guiding light? What kept you inspired through that time when you were going up against someone who would have been unchallenged without you, and who was really not expecting a challenge like yours to come out of nowhere like that?
Well, you're exactly right that the district had been historically Republican. In fact, it hadn't been represented by a Democrat in more than 50 years. And frankly, the greater challenge was that the incumbent I was challenging had been in office for longer than I had been alive. So it was a challenge to get folks to take my campaign seriously. We spent a lot of time trying to convince Democrats that it was even worth running, that it was worth donating $5 or $15 to our campaign so that we could open up an office, so that we could get lawn signs. But ultimately, what inspired me, what made me realize eventually that there was something exciting happening here, was that when we eventually did open up those offices, they were soon filled with beanbag chairs, and those beanbag chairs were soon filled with high school and college students who decided to make politics their extracurricular activity. And that's not maybe so uncommon. There's always a handful of kids who are interested in politics, but usually they want to, go and work for their local congressman to, get something shiny on their resume. These were kids working on a down ballot race. But because we were such a small campaign, because it was just really myself and my college roommate turned campaign manager, we needed all the help we could get. So we didn't just put them in charge of, licking envelopes and stamping letters. We put them in charge of debate prep. They ran our social media. They built our campaign website. They did opposition research. Our campaign was really fueled by young people who were so excited to recognize themselves and the values of their generation in somebody on the ballot. That's ultimately what allowed us to win. And it's what kept me going through the many ups and downs of that campaign.
I love that. I mean, youthful energy in politics is so important. And we met in 2018 when you were running for state senate. I was working on the race in District 36, and I would say I was inspired by you. The next year, I ran for a seat on the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting, and I just finished a 2-year term there. So working in the municipal government and learning about legislating that way and that sort of environment. And I have a personal question for you actually, because I found that I'd been around campaigns and I'd volunteered and I'd worked on these races. But I realized once you are in a legislative setting, once you were in the state senate, or once I was in representative town meeting, I realized politics is a very different world once the campaign is over. And now you're in another space where you're working with people. They have their seats, they have their constituents, they have the things they're fighting for. So I guess what I want to ask you is, what was the biggest difference you noticed between the world of politics when you were in campaign mode versus when, okay, campaign's over, it's time to get work done? What did you notice?
Yeah, that's such a fun question. And first of all, I'm so glad to hear that my journey was one of the things that perhaps drove you to run for office. I'm so grateful for your service on the town level. I wrote this book because we need more young people to step forward, take a leap of faith, and claim a seat at every table where decisions are made. Our generation is systematically underrepresented, and that's a problem because I think we have a unique perspective, right? We know what it's like to participate in a school shooter drill and hear a loud noise in the hallway and worry about where we would hide if the next Sandy Hook or the next Parkland arrived at our school. We know what it's like to learn about climate change and realize, oh my God, this isn't an academic problem. This is an existential threat to our ability to lead happy and healthy lives. We know how freaking hard it is to afford a degree in the 21st century. So I do think young people bring a really valuable perspective, and it's not about replacing one generation or another. It's about fulfilling that promise of representative democracy, where we have more women and more people of color and every generation getting to influence public policy. The biggest change I noticed between the campaign and actually serving in office is the way we talk about bills and issues as being right versus wrong. I try to peel back in the book the weirdest onboarding process ever in my first job out of college, having to answer to 100,000 first bosses, and the struggle of keeping up with everything that was happening at the state capitol. On the campaign trail, you're absolutely right and your opponent is absolutely wrong, and issues are black and white. And then you get elected and it's far more complicated than that. Not always. Some days you feel unequivocally right about pressing the green button on your desk when it comes to voting rights or women's reproductive health. I don't have any hesitations about those issues, but most days are actually about navigating this murky gray area. And I'll give you just one example. I spent Memorial Day of 2019, I believe, marching with EMTs in my district. And they shared with me a little bit about the stress they encounter on the job. And they told me about how that stress impacts their personal and professional lives. We talk a lot about post-traumatic stress in this country, but we talk about it mainly as it relates to men and women who serve overseas, a critically important problem. But we sometimes overlook the fact that people in our own community who wear a uniform every day, who run towards a problem while the rest of us run away from it, they too suffer from post-traumatic stress. Anyways, we had a bill event a few months later it was going to expand post-traumatic stress coverage and healthcare protections for first responders. The problem is the bill covered police officers and firefighters, but it left out EMTs. And I remember sitting there in the Senate chamber thinking, well, voting no is the wrong decision because it wouldn't extend protections for police officers and firefighters who clearly deserve this healthcare coverage. But also voting yes feels like the wrong decision because that would leave behind the group that actually has the highest incidence of post-traumatic stress, and that's EMS crews. So there are often no right answers, and sometimes being an elected official is about maybe disappointing your friends. I ended up voting yes, feeling tremendously guilty about it, coming back the next year and working to expand post-traumatic stress protection successfully for EMT workers. So sometimes progress is incremental, but whereas on the campaign trail, it feels like, you get to pat yourself on the back and feel very righteous that you're doing the right thing. Serving in office is actually about just desperately hoping you get it right more often than you get it wrong.
That's very true. Yeah, and it's a balancing act, right? You're trying to do so many things at once, but it's a challenge, and we really respect and thank everyone who puts themselves through it. You mentioned that you recently wrote this book, this new book, 100,000 First Bosses: My Unlikely Path as a 22-year-old lawmaker. What inspired you to write this book? And could you tell us a little bit more about that title? You said you had 100,000 first bosses after your first job after graduation, and what was that like for you?
Sure. So there's a few reasons I wrote the book, but one of them is that we all direct a lot of energy and attention and agita towards what's happening in Washington, D.C. But one thing that I've learned over the course of these 2 terms is that while Washington is talking about problems, state governments, in some cases, are actually solving them. So I, for example, was really disappointed when Senators Manchin and Sinema decided not to include paid family and medical leave or free community college in President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. But luckily here in Connecticut, we were able to pass paid family and medical leave into law. It's actually the most inclusive, the most generous program in the country. As the chair of the Higher Ed Committee, I had the chance to write Connecticut's free community college program. That's already helped 7,000 students earn a degree. So one thing I've learned is that there's interesting and exciting work happening on the state level. And if we just decided to direct a small portion of the advocacy that we normally send towards Washington, D.C., and instead decide to direct it towards the state level, we could see more transformative changes in our community. I'll just close by saying there's a chapter in the book called Stop Calling Mitch McConnell, Start Calling Your State Representative. You've all probably seen on Instagram, your progressive or your conservative friends encouraging you to pick up the phone and call Chuck Schumer, call Joe Biden, call Mitch McConnell. I've done it. You're not going to reach them, right? The best case scenario, you'll get a friendly intern who listens to you for a polite 5 minutes. But if you pick up the phone and you call your state senator, you're going to get us on our cell phones. And 5, 10, 15 calls can change the course of our day. It can highlight a bill and bring it from obscurity all the way to the governor's desk. So I wanted to write this book to give people a peek behind the curtain at the good, the bad, the ugly, the funny, hopefully, of running for office, but then also serving and what actually happens at your local state capitol.
It's very true. It's very true. And it is very personal once you get down to that level. And people don't realize it. So I'm really excited to read it. It sounds really exciting. And I'd love to ask. So you're coming up on the second half of your second term in Hartford, but you're not running for re-election. How did you come to that decision, and what are you thinking about for your next steps? Because you've been in this world now for, since you graduated, for almost 5 years.
Yeah, it's really hard to step back, to be honest.
Mhm.
I love this job. I think about my 100,000 first bosses from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. Everybody in their first job is eager to please their first boss, and I feel as though with 100,000 of them, I've become a little bit obsessed with trying to deliver for my constituents, to listen to them and learn from them, and then speak in an educated way on their behalf on the Senate floor every day. Um, I will say, though, that the reason I ran is because I think that change in government is important. It's actually good when new voices or different perspectives get to walk into the caucus room or the committee hearing or the Senate floor, for that matter. So while I'm really sad to step away, I think it's going to be great for the constituents of Fairfield County, for the state as a whole, to have somebody else take my seat. Hopefully somebody who, well, they're sure to bring something different. Frankly, they're sure to bring a lot of better ideas probably than the ones I had. I brought down the average age in the Senate. Maybe they'll shake it up in a different way. Maybe it'll, we'll have more women in the Senate, which is so desperately needed. So I'm excited about what's coming next for the district. I'm sad to be leaving. My next step is law school. I am going to be actually headed to New York, so I'll see you there.
Oh,
But
nice.
I hope to continue, in public service in some way. Politics, in my view, is just really one way of trying to make your community a little bit better. But over the last few years, I've met people who are doing that in so many different ways that don't necessarily involve running for office. So this is a step back from politics, but not a step back from public service, in my view.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you've been making the law, and now you're going to go learn some more law. So
Yeah,
it's a different
exactly.
perspective on it.
I messed that, right? Like most people go to law school and then they run for office and then they write a book, and I messed up that order completely. But
Hey, there's no right path for any of this stuff. But you mentioned something about when it comes to public service and giving back, and I want to work in a question from Stephanie here. There's a lot of ways to give back, and there's a lot of money in politics. Do you think that there is a way that we can balance out the money and the effort that we put into politics and the money and the effort that we put into charity, into NGOs, into the nonprofit sector, into giving back in that way? Is that a world that you could see yourself moving into after your experience in politics?
perhaps I would say, in the big picture, it crushes me to see tens of millions of dollars go towards, campaigns like Amy McGrath's
Right.
in Kentucky, right? Nothing against Amy McGrath, but that was probably always an unwinnable race. And those millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars would probably have would certainly have been better spent lifting families out of poverty, providing, free education, job training, even just helping them to afford food to put on the table. There's so many better ways to spend that money that nonprofits and NGOs and charitable organizations, could have really used that support. I just want to say, there's some things about Connecticut that really need changing, but there's one great thing about Connecticut as it relates to our political system, and that's we have publicly financed elections. It's the only reason that somebody like myself could afford to run for office. The system says that you have to raise a little bit of money. You have to raise $15,000 from about 300 people in your district. And then after that, the state kicks in with a grant. After that, you receive that grant, you can't spend a penny more. That includes a penny more of your own money. So all of a sudden, it doesn't matter whether you're 22 years old or whether you're a 22-year incumbent. It doesn't matter how many wealthy or well-connected friends you have. It doesn't matter whether you have a huge savings account or whether you're like me and running for office before you've even opened up a savings account. We got to spend our campaign asking people for votes and not asking people for checks. That's huge. It's only the case in 6 states across the country, but it should be something that we look at nationally. Publicly financing elections will help bring down the exorbitant cost of these races and help to even the playing field and elect a more representative government, and hopefully direct some of our behavior as donors towards nonprofits and charitable organizations that desperately need the support, and away from what I think should be a state function, which is funding these campaigns.
That's very true, and it is a great program. It makes me proud to be from Connecticut. So I think a big question for you is, if someone's watching this and is a young person who's really interested in getting involved in this world and maybe even running for office themselves, where do you think is a good place to start? And if someone isn't trying to run for office themselves but wants to be involved, what are the best ways to get involved?
Sure. So I love that question, because every week, sometimes twice a week, twice this week, I get a call from a young person somewhere in the country, often in Connecticut, but sometimes in Alabama or in Florida and Georgia. They're looking for advice about how to get into public service, and they tell me that they want to run for office one day. And I beg them every time to consider bumping up their timeline, because actually, the problems that we're facing, whether it's the rising cost of college, the rapidly warming planet, the cycle of gun violence, they're really urgent. We really can't afford to we don't have the luxury in our generation of sitting on our hands and waiting to get involved one day. It feels crazy to run for office before you have taken out a mortgage, before you have a family and a golden retriever to put on a glossy mailer. But actually, just because you don't recognize yourself in the other elected officials in your community, that isn't a reason that you should step back from politics or consider not running. It's just the opposite. It's a reason that your voice is needed. If you're different, if you would shake things up, if you would challenge your community's conception of what it means to be an elected official, well then I desperately hope that you'll decide to run. And as a very first step, take a look at who's representing you in government. Look at your board of ed, look at your representative town meeting, look into the voting record of your state senator. Maybe you agree with them. I very much agreed with my town government and with my state representative, but when I got to my state senator, I was shocked to find somebody who had said that we went too far in regulating guns. When we live just around the corner from Sandy Hook, I and just about every member of my community believes that we hadn't gone far enough in regulating guns. Sometimes our representative democracy isn't functional because people just don't take the time to look into these voting records, to challenge incumbents. And that isn't a judgment call. We all lead busy lives. But if you do have a little bit of time in your life, if you do have the ability to dig into these issues, you might be shocked to find out who's speaking supposedly on your behalf in government.
Very true. It's very real. One more question that I would love to ask. We've seen a lot of changes in politics over the last 2 years, I would say for the better. But politics is still a dirty word for a lot of people, and people can get really beaten down by it or get really frustrated by the state of things. What is something, maybe in Connecticut, maybe outside of Connecticut, maybe in the electoral world, maybe outside of that, what's something in politics that has been inspiring you lately, that has been giving you hope, that has really been exciting to you over maybe, let's say, the last year?
Okay, that's a great question and a huge question. I would say, yeah, politics is a dirty word, but it shouldn't be. And I get frustrated by those who vilify politicians just as much as I get frustrated by those who deify politicians. I grew up in the Aaron Sorkin West Wing bubble, thinking that politicians were geniuses, Nobel laureates who juggled multiple games of chess and international crises at the same time. And then there are people who maybe watch cable TV and think that our elected officials eat children for breakfast every morning. And the truth of the matter, at least in my experience, is that it's somewhere in between. Actually, most elected officials, certainly at the state level, they're just regular people who have a few ideas about trying to make their community a little bit better. But they neither deserve deification or vilification. And I think we just have to sort of embrace the idea that politicians are normal people, because then it's a self-fulfilling cycle. And hopefully more normal people will run for office, folks who, just want to make their community a little bit better. I'll just close by saying that there was a bill I had worked on with regard to student loan relief, a huge issue for me and for the state of Connecticut, where we have the highest student loan debt in the country. And I had passed the bill in the Senate. It was a tax credit to help recent graduates pay off their student loans, but I couldn't get the bill called in the House. And to answer your question about what inspires me, what ultimately ended up happening with this legislation was the realtors got involved. Why do realtors care? Well, interestingly, student loan debt delays the purchase of a first home in Connecticut by an average of 7 years. So the realtors have something to gain by helping people escape their student loan debt, because only then will they begin to sell more homes in our community. So the realtors got involved and they activated their network. And a handful of realtors, 3 or 4, picked up the phone and started to call their state representative. I was standing in the well of the House and I could literally see it happening. It was the coolest thing in the world. These state representatives started to look at their cell phones. They were getting texts and missed calls and voicemails. And suddenly we couldn't sign up co-sponsors fast enough. It got called for a vote that afternoon. And the next day the governor signed it into law. And just seeing that constituent voices still matter, that politicians at the state level anyways do still answer to the people, that as taking just a few minutes from your day to pick up that phone and share your voice with your representatives can help a bill go from on the brink of failure to law of the land. That cut through a lot of the cynicism that I feel about politics. And actually, I'm walking out of this experience feeling more optimistic about the state of our politics than I was when I walked into the building.
That is amazing to hear. And that is a great story. I mean, that's one of those issues that, I think if people talk about it more, we've been able to witness just in the last couple of years, the way that the window's been shifting, the way that we realize how many more people will benefit from it. And even if it's, we try and get things done on the federal level, it can be so hard. There's so many roadblocks, but the window is shifting and it makes it more and more likely that it will happen in the future. And it's thanks to, people like you. It's really great. And I know you said you came from the West Wing universe. I wouldn't say I came from the Aaron Sorkin West Wing universe, but I feel very partial to the Armando Iannucci Veep universe. It's like very much the politics world sometimes. But hey, you got to laugh if you're gonna be in this world.
At least it's not House of Cards, man. That's the key.
Well, hopefully not. Yeah. Well, this has really been amazing, Will. Before we run out of time, let's ask where can people find out more about your book? Where can we get it? And in your other work that's coming up?
It is available where books are sold. You can get it online. If you're considering buying it and have a great local bookstore in your neighborhood, that's where, I've been encouraging folks to buy it if they're able. But seriously, any purchase means the world to me. I hope that the book makes you laugh. I hope that it makes you feel optimistic about the future of American politics. And if you want to get in touch, please visit my website, check out some of the things I'm working on in Connecticut on my Facebook page or my Twitter. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. And thanks again to Power to Fly for having us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Will. And thank you, Power to Fly. This has been really amazing. Have a great rest of your day.